All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a few moments. See some people trickling in. Thank you. Excellent. All right, well, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Allison Heaney, the Vice President of Learning and Public Programs here at MOLAA. Joining me is Soly Marsales, VP of Content Innovation and Outreach, and Joey Terrill, their artist. We welcome you today, Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023, to this edition of the MOLAA Zoom Project in conversation with the artist Joey Terrill, where MOLAA Chief Curator Gabriel Urtiaga will discuss with the artist his work and career. MOLAA also acknowledges the support of the Genesis Inspiration Foundation, the Miller Foundation, Dwight Stewart Youth Fund, and the Arts Council for Long Beach for their constant support of the educational initiatives at the Museum of Latin American Art. And a special thank you to the California Arts Council Arts Exposure Grant. Each chapter of the MOLAA Zoom Project features a conversation between the most remarkable artists from Latin America and Latinx across the U.S. and our MOLAA Chief Curator. Together, we focus on a series of specific works which require close inspection, a deliberate process of contemplation and exploration, delving into the ideas surrounding the creation of the works, their sources of research and inspiration, in an effort to immerse ourselves in the world of the artist. In Chapter 30 of the MOLAA Zoom Project, we are joined by multidisciplinary artist Joey Terrill, who is best known for his paintings and prints, which has stood at the forefront of queer Chicano art. Joey Terrill is a Chicano artist and second-generation native of East LA, born in 1955. For nearly 4 decades, his artworks have pushed the boundaries of form and cultural representation by exploring the confluences of race and sexuality. He incorporates social activism and a commitment to social justice in much of his work, including making statements about queer identity and culture, confronting the culture of machismo and masculinity in Chicano culture, and making statements about life with HIV. HIV's place in society and popular culture, the commercialism of HIV medication in the marketplace. Terrill's paintings and drawings form in portraits from individuals of his life, whether it be friends, families, lovers, the artist himself, and many of his works also consist of still life compositions using inanimate objects. Many times the animate and the inanimate come together in one piece to make his intended statement. He's shown his work at the Bronx Museum of Arts in New York, the University Museum of Contemporary Art in Mexico, Brooklyn Art Museum in Brooklyn, New York, among others. As we begin this presentation, we encourage you to share your questions and feedback using the chat feature and Q&A. This interview was pre-recorded at his studio, but we'll be joining the artist live with Q&A post-interview. And with that, I'll hand it off to Soly Marsales, who will begin the presentation.
Oh, thank you, Joey, for this fantastic moment. And as one of the most influential artists in the Chicano art movement, you highlight the Mexican-American experience in Los Angeles starting in the 70s. And from your beginning, you were interested in art, but also in political action, right? And I would like to know if you can tell us your beginnings as an artist and also your commitment with the climax of that complex social and political period, because you have been involved in creating a personal body of work that transmits the spirit and energy of the Chicano queer culture, and also your pieces work as a catalyst for art, cultural liberation linked to a strong iconography. Well, we are so curious about your amazing career.
Great, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me be able to talk today. So, I'm a native Angelino. My mother was born in LA. My dad was born in Arizona. My grandparents were from Sonora, Mexico. But like many people in my generation, many Chicanos in my generation, during the 1950s and 60s, there was a lot of racial animosity towards us, whatever. And my parents were aware of that. I was raised to be very proud to be Mexican, yet at the same time they wanted me to learn English because they wanted me to succeed in school. At an early age, I started to recognize that, oh, you know, there are these other people that are not very nice to Mexicans. My father was a former Marine, but he was a frustrated artist. So I grew up with his paintings and in the home, as well as some of his sculptures. And the garage, he always parked the car in the driveway. The garage was his workshop or studio. So some of my first early memories still, you know, I think, you know, as a toddler, was assisting him, working with him, doing collage and doing, you know, little art. I just thought that that's what people do. You make art, right? My mother, on the other hand, would say, I'm not an artist at all. But she was a dancer, she was a singer, she loved to sing all the time, and she was a housewife growing up with me. We first grew up in Santa Fe Springs till the age of 7. My parents divorced. Long story here, but it factors into my wanting to be a storyteller. My mother suffered a nervous breakdown and was institutionalized, and that totally changed my world, totally turned it upside down. Long story short, eventually when she came out 3 years later, at the age of 11 or 12, I ended up, me and my younger sister, being caregivers in a sense to my mom. Our roles were reversed. So there's a painting that I've done of my mom. It's very personal, that I know you're familiar with, called Mother and Son.
It's a beautiful piece.
And I specifically chose to make that painting because most Chicanos would do some version of the Virgen de Guadalupe.
Yeah.
Okay, whether it was in reverence, whether it was parody, whether it was a feminist perspective. I chose to take the most famous icon of Mexico, female icon, and do a secular version placing my mother in place of the Virgin. And I did that. In that painting, I chose an image of her when she was at her happiest. It was 1957. It was Mexico in Cananea at my grandmother's. She's holding me up and she is proud. She is proud because she's a successful wife. She's a successful mother. She has her firstborn son, you know, and as a Catholic, Chicana, she was extremely happy. Like I said, things changed after that, and that's why I chose to do that in that painting. My inspiration for telling stories, ironically, came from my looking at Frida Kahlo's work. Wow. Which, you know, with Frida Kahlo's work from the early 70s, when I was just coming out of high school, going into college, I absolutely was floored by her work, and I appreciated the confessional aspect of it, the in-your-face, way that she would tell her realities, you know, her pain, her physical pain, her emotional pain, her romances, her heartbreak. I mean, her birth, she puts it all out there, and she did it in these really small paintings, which to me were small, like little. I think it was Andre Breton's, and they said she's like a bomb, tied in a ribbon. I also, though, appreciated. I remember a quote where, when she was referred to as a surrealist, she said, "No, I don't paint my dreams." Or something. I'm going to misquote.
Yes.
She paints her reality. So I took that as a charge for me to paint myself, and the reason I did is because as a young Chicano, I was also very aware that I was gay, or queer, or whatever we want to call it. And I also knew that within my culture, that was a taboo, it was stigma. And as I became involved with the Chicano Power Movement and La Huelga, I was a high school volunteer for La Huelga. We'd help go and get signatures and in front of supermarkets to get people to boycott, non-union grapes and lettuce, and I would attend meetings. And that was something that I felt very strongly about, and I also knew that these very same people here make me invisible, don't think that gay people have a place within the familia. And so I was determined to explore my identity of both being gay and Chicano, where they blended, but also maybe more importantly, where they clashed. There was a lot of expectations of machismo for being a male, and that was something that I always found interesting, and it really didn't reflect the reality around me. I mean, I knew Chicanos, heterosexual Chicanos. My uncle Rudy, who I adore, rest in peace. He was the cook in the family. He cooked all the time. My aunt, my tia, they both were working, but my tia never had to cook. That was one of the jokes in the family. She's lucky she married Rudy.
Yeah.
So to me, the strictures of what I'm supposed to be was something that I was always exploring in my work. I guess that leads the.
This is
premise.
amazing and so inspiring, because when we can put the focus in your creation, we are discover a lot of stories, right?
Yeah.
And Joey, you are a multidisciplinary artist committed to the present, and at the same time an explorer of the past. And you are a curious artist that work with humor, and I discovered that you work with too much love for your friends, for your community, and also with a realistic view with different decades of the queer community and HIV journey. Could you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. So since my work always had an autobiographical narrative, I painted my experiences, my friends, my family. Once AIDS hit the community, it was only a matter of time before I started to make art about AIDS and its impact. And there's lots of details and context here, but for many years, being HIV positive myself, and for full disclosure, this year I'm 43 years HIV positive. Never expected to live this long. Excuse me. Friends were dying all around me.
Yeah.
My coworkers were dying all around me. The other artist friends were dying all around me. The kids from the clubs, the musicians I knew, they were all dying. So for me, it was wartime, and I became a soldier in the war around combating the stigma around HIV and AIDS, but also for the government to pay attention to the fact that people were dying. It was very clear to me that the government, the United States government, couldn't care less about those individuals who were dying. We were disposable because they were the poor, they were queer, gay, Latinos, blacks. The people who had the least amount of resources were the ones most affected and the most stigmatized. So that was the challenge. And I always try to do humor in my work, and sometimes I also want to get serious, but still do it. My work is sometimes considered very, colorful and almost cartoonish, and I know that for some people that has led to them not taking it seriously necessarily for many years. But I think that it helps when there's something that is accessible. So just real quick here, one of the things that occurred for me, a pivot, was in the mid-90s when the advent of antiretroviral therapies was starting to work, and I recognized for the first time that I was not going to die. And that was a powerful recognition for me. But it also left me with a feeling of ambivalence, because all of my friends, most of them had already died. It was too late for them to be saved. Here I was living, and I was going to continue to live. And I was grateful that I had these medications and drugs that helped keep me alive. But I also recognized that those drugs are products, for the big, huge pharmaceutical industry that are making millions or billions, off of that. And so that informed my advocacy, and that led to a whole nother direction in a series that I did, my Still Life series, Still Lives with HIV Medications. My purpose in doing that was to bring attention to the expensive HIV medications, but also to put HIV meds in a domestic familiar setting that could be accessible. People could look at the Still Life and they could see Cheerios, they could see products, and the HIV meds were products just like any other profit-making venture, right? But the way that I presented, I thought, was with humor, but also making people feel comfortable with an uncomfortable subject matter.
Of course.
I think.
Yes, this is an amazing, because at the same time you are a poet of a daily life, but also in your work you are paying tribute to your friends, celebrating life, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
part of that.
Yes.
And I think when we have the opportunity to put the focus in your most fantastic pieces, we can discover layers of information and stories about your past, your present, and also what happened in the future, right? A question that you are sharing with the audience. And I think that connection is so deep and so necessary, especially in this particular time, right?
Yes, and quote unquote, in this particular time. Don't get me started.
Yeah,
But yes.
exactly. And Joey, we have around your fantastic pieces here in your studio, but I would like if you can share with us some stories about your period in New York and your famous pieces of the Chicano in Bad New York series. And also we are here in front of this fantastic My Mother Maiden Name from 1980.
Yes, and so once I had been living with HIV, for, let's see, I was 25, and then it was when I turned 50, I realized that I was now, from this point forward, going to be living with HIV longer than I ever did previously, HIV negative. And that really, was something that weighed in my head, and what does that mean? And it got me starting to look back to when I moved to New York in 1980, because that's when my doctor theorizes that I was infected. And if you want, I can tell you the little story of what happened.
Yes, please.
First, I moved to New York in 1980 because New York was the art center, and it was always, and even if it wasn't the art center, I wanted to go and see Central Park. I wanted to go and visit the Empire State Building, all the things that I had read about and seen on TV and movies, etc., right? Very excited. But I had two goals. One was that I wanted to exhibit my art in New York. My second goal was to see John and Yoko. I thought, even if I just, I'm walking through Central Park and I get to wave to them, then that will be one of my goals accomplished.
Oh, so beautiful.
So 3 months before I prepared to leave, my sister called me up. She was taking a break from UC Santa Barbara. She said, how about if I move with you? I was like, great, fantastic. So she went with me as well, and it was a moment of such a great adventure for us. We were always very close. We were considered two peas in a pod. And she only lasted there about 4 months and came back, but I stayed until through 1981. But one of the things that happened was that on December 8th, 1980, I was 4 blocks away on 72nd Street when John Lennon was shot. And, unbelievable to me. The impact of the grief was astounding. And I ran down there and stood out there for about 8 hours in the freezing cold, stunned, as the crowds grew, more and more people just in silence and weeping, which I've done a painting of that.
Yes.
At that time, I had thought, this is a harbinger of what's to come. The 1980s are going to be way different. The 70s were a big party. They seem to be ending. Harvey Milk was assassinated in 78. 2 years later now, John Lennon. I just had this sense or feeling. I was working at Conrad's, the British department store, and one day I woke up before I went to work, and I had broken out in hives. I had these horrible, ugly blotches all over my face, my arms. I had never experienced anything like that. I didn't know what it was. I looked like a monster. I was so scared. I didn't know what it meant. My supervisor didn't believe me when I called in. She's like, yeah, hives, okay. And I said, no, really, you gotta believe me. Went to a doctor. Doctor didn't know what it was. He goes, it could be any number of things, blah, blah, blah. But then after 2 days, it just went away. And so I went into work. My boss said, oh, so they went away. I said, yes. She didn't believe me. But as I was there working, I was folding Duri rugs from India. I felt my arm get warm, and I looked, and I could see the blotches returning. And I went to her to go show her, and she looked at me. She said, oh, go home. She goes, because I didn't know, but it was already on my face, right? So that was a really strange, weird moment. It was later in 1981, a few months later, and I was moving back to LA, that the first cases of what we later then knew would be HIV were reported in homosexual men. I didn't get tested for years because I didn't see any reason for it. I knew that there was no cure. If I knew that I was positive, I knew it would just depress me and I would die just like a lot of my friends were dying. On 89, there was a change in the thinking. The medical community said, if you get tested now, there are certain drugs you can start on and it will stave off or mitigate the onset of AIDS. And I said, well, that makes sense. So I went and got tested. When we did, the first thing my doctor said is, let's see if we can find out how long it's been since you've been HIV positive. And he said, have you ever had a weird experience that was unexplained, like breaking out in hives or having, like flu-like symptoms or something just for a day or two and maybe it comes back? I said, wow, only one time that's ever happened to me. And I said, that was 1980, New York City. He said, I can guarantee you that's when you zero converted. That's what happens to a lot of people. So I did the math, 80, here it was 89. The prevailing thought was you get infected. 10 years later, you have AIDS. So I, for those few years going into the 90s, thought, oh my God, it's gonna be a year before I die from AIDS. That was my mindset at the time, and it was devastating to me. Devastating because not for me personally, but I kept thinking of my mother and my sister. That my mother would have to grieve for her firstborn, that my sister would have to grieve for her only brother. And then my sister would also then have to take on the responsibility of caring for my mother, who had frail mental state of mind. So these were all the factors that were, interplaying in my choosing to do the art that I was doing. And some of it was very much involved with direct advocacy for HIV. We did a project, Chicos Modernos, a little comic book magazine that was being distributed by the CORE program in West Hollywood. And this was specifically for hustlers and men, Latinos, who didn't speak English, who were out, hustling sex for survival. Many of them were from, Mexico, Central America, whatever. They did not identify as gay, right? They had wives, families, girlfriends. So they weren't really listening to the messaging that was out there about HIV. Oh, it's a gay disease, it's not gonna affect me. So they needed to have something that was accessible, something that was not threatening, and the language had to be simple. There was a lot of information coming out at that time, but it was a lot of clinical analysis and medical terminology that even for English-speaking educated people, it was difficult to get through. So so that was something that I did, and I mean, for full disclosure, the first issue that was done was not done by me. It was done by an artist named Bruce Rapp. And I was at the Silver Lake Street Fair, and they were distributing this comic book, and I got it, and I thought, oh my God, this is wonderful. I should be doing something like this. And then about 4 months later, I get a phone call from my friend Steven, who said, hey, have you heard of Chicos Modernos? I said, yeah, I have. I love that. He goes, well, you know, that's the core program. That's me. I did the text. I go, oh my God, I didn't realize. And he said, yeah. He says, we were wondering though, you know, if you'd be able to do the illustrations, because Bruce is now too sick. We want to do volume 2. So I said, absolutely. And so I did volume 2, volume 3, and volume 4.
Wow.
And, you know, and also, again, you know, as I've said before, I'm very pocho. I don't speak Spanish very well. But I thought, you know what? I still want to do this.
Yeah.
And I could have someone who would translate it into Spanish. And so I was able to, you know, do that. And it turned out, I think it was very successful in terms of getting the message out there. There was another HIV prevention grant that we got when I was with Viva, which is the Organization for Gay and Lesbian Latino Artists, as we called ourselves. And I did a calendario, that the kind of calendars that usually are given out at restaurants and at bakeries and, you know, all throughout East LA. And they usually have an image by the artist Jesus Helguera, which indicates, you know, Aztec mythology, and these really beautifully, you know, rendered illustrations that even if they look very, to me, they look very cinematic, you know. And but I did one to try to counter the stigma, and I have the it's based on the myth of, you know, El Popo, but I have the warrior there with a young Indio lying in his arms, but rather than being pale and dead or close to death, he's definitely alive. And it says, you know, apoya tu hermanos con VIH, and, you know, support your brothers with HIV and AIDS. And that was a calendar that was distributed to social service organizations, to Latino groups, and, you know, and again, I was trying to get the everyday Latino to understand and have empathy for people with HIV. So those are two examples where my art shifted to that. But when I realized that I was now starting to live longer, I was starting to look back at photos from when I lived in New York, and I came across images where, oh, this is before I was infected, before I broke out. And then these other ones, I already was infected, but I didn't even realize it. So I started to make my New York series, and that includes this painting that is here to my right, called My Mother's Maiden Name. And what it portrays is my boyfriend at the time, Rick, had come to visit me in New York, and we were walking around Soho, and just looking at all the old iron buildings and stuff. And as we were walking, I saw someone had scribbled in chalk, Mendoza, my mother's maiden name. So I said, oh, Rick, take my picture here, whatever. I was feeling a little homesick, but I wanted to take a picture to send to my mom. And so I sat there and posed with it. It never ever occurred to me that, oh, you know, like, you know, 40, 30 years later, you're going to use that image for a painting. And in doing these paintings, the New York series, I viewed it as, in some ways, I looked at it as, this is my movie. Like, if I were a filmmaker, I would be making a movie and telling my story of going to New York, getting infected, but also having friends and engaging with the city itself. And so the size of it is what I call my movie screen size. And, you know, and this is before cell phones and all of that stuff. Yeah. So that's why it's the size that it is.
Wow, it's beautiful.
So the other part of this is that I did exhibit my work. That was my other goal. At an alternative art space on White Street in Tribeca. And back then, Tribeca was not as fancy as it is today. but it was still very, and maybe because it wasn't that fancy, it was extra cool, extra hip.
Exactly.
But I had 3 windows. There were business windows that I could put my work in. So I did 3 paintings called Chicanos Invade New York, and one of them is making tortillas in Soho, because I found myself in New York really missing tortillas, missing Mexican food. And at that time, there were very few, if any, Mexican restaurants. And so I called my Uncle Rudy in LA, said, Tio, tell me, how do you make tortillas? And he told me. And as I was making them, I remember thinking to myself, you know, people come to Soho to make art, and here I am, I come to make tortillas. And so that was one of the images that I put. The other was, again, honoring John Lennon, called Reading the Local Paper, where I'm standing holding the New York Post with the headlines, John Lennon shot dead. And of course, there's a few little references to Christmas decorations, because it just made it even more poignant. And then the third piece was a group painting of my sister, my friend Victor, who was living there with Steven, and my friend Eddie Dominguez, who was visiting from Mexico. We were all standing in front of the Guggenheim in a blizzard, and we're searching for burritos. Okay, and metaphorically, you know, the search for burritos and standing in front of the Guggenheim was also that we are searching for Chicano art, and we weren't finding it any more than we were finding burritos. So the exclamation point on all of this is that the work has been acquired by MoMA, and which is astounding to me, and it's been on display in the gallery. I was able to go and visit it, and when I walked in and saw it hanging for the first time, there were like 20 children sitting there with the educator, Carolina, and they were discussing the work. And I was just moved beyond, you know, whatever. God. And then she said, "Oh, we have a special guest. The artist is here." So I was able to talk with the kids and some of the parents, and it was just a remarkable experience.
What a moment! Joy.
Yeah. So that's part of my New York story there.
Yeah, but this is your
real contribution, right? Not only about the art scene, but also with the community, that you have a strong commitment. And hearing you talking about
your story and your transition in the different periods of your life, how did you manage that transition in your creation? And for example, if you like, we can put the focus in the most recent pieces that you create with the series of Mi Casta es tu Casta. Or you can decide another piece, but let us know and explain a little more your creative method, in the case that at the same time you are documenting a lot of group of people in your artwork, right?
Yes. So one thing about me is that when I went to Immaculate Heart College, one of the things that I got from being there from different instructors was questioning, why are you making this piece? I mean, along with the choosing a medium, how to gesso and paint a canvas, how to cut paper, do collage, whatever. But what is your intent? What is the context? Why the concept? So I come up with the concept first, and then the concept will determine the chosen medium. So in this new series that I've been working on the past couple years, which I call Mi Casta es su Casta, it's my version of the castas genre of painting from 18th century Mexico, or New Spain, as it was called. In which the artists doing paintings for a European audience would actually write on the paintings the racial categories of the individuals portrayed. And these categories had a caste system with the Espanol, you know, the Spanish white, if you will, being at the top, and then lowering in value, the mestizo, the indio, and then all the way down to the el negro being at the bottom.
Yeah.
When I first saw these paintings years ago at LACMA, it was a great exhibit. I was astounded. I was like, oh my God, how could artists? I didn't realize artists had played such a role in developing these racial categories in very derogatory ways in some cases.
Yes.
And but yet at the same time, the paintings were so beautiful. So for me, there was this contradiction, and I thought one day I'm going to have to deal with that. And so that day came in 2018 as I was looking around and seeing all of the current zeitgeist about identity and gender and names and Latinx and Latino and Chicano, Chicanx, and all the discussions going on about that. And I came up with the idea, I'll do my own Casta's paintings. In my paintings, I'm painting individuals that I know or I'm friends with, and I let them choose how they want their ethnic or racial category placed in the painting, as well as they can put as much or as little as they want about who their parents were, or son or daughter, hijo o hija de Señora Garcia, etc. But also because it's the 21st century, I asked them if they would like to put their sexual orientation and or gender identity. And I'm calling it Mi Casta es su Casta. So again, a little play on words there. And so these are oil paintings. I usually have painted for 30, 40 years in acrylics. These are oil paintings, and I try to sort of indicate the style of 18th century Mexico.
Yeah.
So.
And also it's a dialogue with the famous quote of Mi casa is tu casa, no?
Yes.
Mi casa es tu casa,
Yes.
mi casta es tu casta.
Yes.
Yeah.
So and so it's about inclusivity. It's about people feeling like being welcomed into a community. But also it's a little bit of how can I put this? I've met people who are so ardent about the proper word, the proper term is Latinx, or the proper term is whatever. Well, yeah, maybe, but there are people who aren't comfortable with that, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
So that when you say casta, you're saying a caste system, and that's very different from saying my community, my whatever. So I'm sort of like, just be careful of how you casta. I'm gonna be very interested to see 20, 30 years from now where those discussions lead.
Exactly.
Right?
I really love your approach about this important topic, because at the same time, the identity is a construction, right?
Yes.
It's like a work in progress, that the most important thing also through the art is to be inclusive.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And not reject other people that maybe think totally different about you. And I think this is the powerful of your work, that you invite through the art to open conversation about different topics and different problematic and hard issues, that we can start a conversation through your amazing creation.
Thank you.
And this is incredible, and we are grateful for that. And then I would like to put the focus in some of your new also paintings, or your paintings that you are creating and presenting also your friends, like Pink Cloud from 2008. And I see in this composition that you are conjugating the two great topics that you are interested in, the Latinidad, right?
Yes.
And the LGBTQ community.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little more about this fantastic portrait and also your creative process?
Okay, so with this series, this stemmed from, for 25 years I had a studio in the Santa Fe Art Colony in the industrial district of downtown LA. Okay, And so, being down there, there's tons of graffiti all over the place. And some of it is the, very beautiful, wild style, balloony, whatever. And a lot of it is just, I'm over it. But to me, the real art that I saw was in the little tiendas, the little, shops and things that immigrants were doing and painting. And they would paint the products right on like little murals. So they'd have Clorox bleach right next to, the Virgen de Guadalupe. And if they sold food, they'd have like the food there. They'd have watermelons and mangoes and whatever. And I thought those were beautiful. And they showed, sometimes the artists were not very, they didn't have a fine art education, and it wasn't necessary to. But I thought that is the real, center of the Latino experience here in the industrial district in downtown LA. So I thought I want to try to paint that way individuals, which is a little bit, and I don't mean this in any way disparagingly, but a little bit folkloric, and there's probably a better word for it. But the subjects that I chose, the ones you see in those paintings, they're individuals in porn. They're Latinos in porn. And what I do is I select some of the Latinos, and it's mostly amateur porn, and they're very young, and regardless of what we may think of that or how we feel about that or not. But what I do is I then put t-shirts and clothes on them. And I've always had a love for stripes, and so I use it as an opportunity visually to put stripes. And but I put them in these scenarios that people will wonder. They're a little enigmatic. Are these boyfriends? Are they brothers? Are they cousins? Are they, a father or son? Sometimes there's 3 characters in there, the rest, 3 Latinos, and, and different shades, different hair texture. Again, the images are taken from porn. And so I love when people will look at them and say, oh, these are so charming, these are so sweet, whatever. Who are they? I go, they're porn, guys. It jolts them into that. And again, I'm being a little bit humorous, but I also I like to think anyway that it's using these individuals who are probably stigmatized for being in porn, and again, without any judgment, and trying to present them with a little bit of dignity and fun.
No, it's amazing, Joey. And of course, you at the same time you are presenting the urban life.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That this is incredible as a testimony of
Yes.
our time.
Yes.
And here you are in front of your one of most recent piece, right? The Deposition of Christ 50 times from 2023, and this is an in progress piece, right?
Yes.
And you are selecting symbolic images and with a lot of information there, and also you are playing with color, the repetition of the same picture as a pop artist,
Yes.
and the pop imaginary. And let us know what is in this particular moment, your questions that you are translating in your fantastic pieces.
Well, so what this came out of or from was back in the 1980s with the Names Project quilt. My friend Jerry had died. His partner Rob asked me if I would paint a quilt or make a quilt that we could present in Washington D.C. for the Names Project, and I did. And in fact, there's a painting behind me that's called "The Quilt I Made for My Friend Jerry." And at that moment I thought, oh, that's what I should do. I should make quilts for every one of my friends that died. But I realized that if I were to do that, I wouldn't have time for anything else. So I was trying to figure out how to make art that was about the width and breadth and enormity of all the folks that had passed. So I have said to folks that I talk to that I stopped counting after 50. After there were 50 people that I knew who died, from friends, ex-boyfriends, classmates, co-workers, the waiters that waited on me in a restaurant, or the person who worked behind the counter at the laundromat, neighbors. I mean, there were just so many folks that had died. It was the enormity of it. I kept thinking, how do I do two things: illustrate the enormity of that, but also the sanctity of individuals dying from AIDS. Mm-hmm. And I was always, I'm a big fan of Caravaggio's work. Mm-hmm. So within this, I think it's the entombment of Christ. There's the image of the dead human Christ being laid down. And I've chosen to isolate that image and replicate it, indicating the amount of death around us. But also what I think I'm doing is, what I'm saying is that every person who dies from AIDS, just like every person who dies, is just as holy as the Christ figure, the dead Christ. And in doing this, why I chose this image is it Nicodemus, I think is the character over there? And you see someone else with their hand. Yeah. I love that hand. Yeah. And for me, this is about the death, but it's also about the grief. Those of us that are left behind, those of us that are, still here and love the person who has died. In doing this is the epochs of, the series. So it's 50 images of the Christ figure. I chose to use and borrow from the Andy Warhol strategy of repetition, and also the changing of color. And I like to think that in this, every image is the same, but yet every one of them is individually painted. So it's my metaphorically saying how each person is unique. I've also come to recognize something here, though, that I hadn't when I started it out, that some of the colors, when you start to look at them, your eye moves from this blue to, and this blue over here, this matches this color, this matches that color. And for me, this is just me, other people may not see this, but I look at it as, and that's the way somehow the disease, the illness, this person knew that person, engaged with that person, had sex with that person, and and again, without judgment, but everyone, that's how that occurs. Also, I should state, just for clarification for people that don't know me, I'm recently retired, but for 17 years I worked for the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. About the last 6 years, I was director of global advocacy and partnerships, working with our global teams, 5 global bureaus, 44 countries, 1.7 million people in care and treatment. I was able to travel and visit China, Cambodia, Thailand, Honduras, Haiti, Jamaica, South Africa, Kenya, and engage with people living with HIV, as well as the advocates and the medical staff in these countries. And it's a homage to all of them that face tremendous challenges. Stigma, homophobia, misogyny is still so prevalent in many of these countries. It's really abysmal. But so that if anyone's wondering, gee, why is he focusing on this? Well, that's sort of why, because it was part of my everyday life experience, my occupation, my job, and what I brought to the table, what I brought to visiting, especially with the younger, a lot of girls. About 75% of cases in Africa are young girls and women, right? So it's not the quote unquote gay disease like it was pegged here in the media in the United States. But what I bring to these young people is I inform them that I've been living with HIV twice as long that they've been alive. And it really has an impact on them because all they have known is their parents died of AIDS, their family dies of AIDS, their neighbors die of AIDS, they get shunned in school, so it gives them some inkling that they do have lives to lead, and I said, hey, and you want to have children, you'll be able to, and have grandchildren, and get gray hair just like mine. So, that's
part of your journey. Joey,
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
It's a privilege to have this amazing conversation. Thank you for your generosity and for opening up your studio to MOLAA and our audience. You are amazing and inspiration.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
What a fantastic interview. Thank you so much. So I think Soleiman will also be popping on screen here as well. Thank you so much. That was just such an incredible presentation and discussion of your work. So we would like to open it up now to questions from our audience. We do have the artist with us here. And I do have one question to start us off here from Ruben Esparza, who's asking, Joey, could you please share a bit more about Que Viva and its art and activism or artivism through the Latino LGBTQ lens?
Sure. So thank you. Hi, Soli. So I was in the early 90s. There was a group in Los Angeles called Viva, which was the organization for gay and lesbian Latino artists. That's what we called ourselves. And I joined as a board member for 5 years, and it was one of the best 5 years in my life. I had the opportunity to engage and work and collaborate with these wonderful creators and artists, and that includes Ruben, who's asking the question, but it includes Luis Alfaro, Monica Palacios, Teddy Sandoval, Jeff Huereque, the list goes on. And we would put on art exhibits and art shows, and sometimes they were very provocative, but there was always this great energy and synergy of both lesbian, gay, bi, just in general representation of Latinissimo. And we were doing this in a time when HIV and AIDS was all around us, and so it was a very heady time to do these works that challenged, the stigma, the homophobia. And I think for us, or for myself, I'll speak for myself. I always feel like there's two audiences. One is the Chicano or Latino audience, in general, that, hey, we are here, we are your familia, we're not gonna go anywhere. And it's really, it's all good, right? But it's also for the white audiences who aren't that familiar with Chicanos or lesbians or gay men or transgender. It's sort of like there's the two combined there. But it was a very great experience. And there was a book on Viva that was written by Professor Rob Hernandez. If anyone wants to look it up, it's a really thorough, comprehensive overview of all the work that we did throughout the Los Angeles area. So
That's fantastic. And I'll actually look for a link there. Solimar, I think.
So actually, yeah, I wanted to, first of all, thank you for allowing us to go to your studio and film. It was a great experience. And just for having you here live today, I think it's a great combination of just having that intimate look and feel, and then having you here to answer some questions for us. I wanted to sort of go a little bit abroad. And I remember when MOLAA hosted the duo Chiacho and Giannone back in 2019, and they were looking at doing a lot of tributes for the local Chicano and LG and Latinx artists with their LGBTQ plus within the community. How do you I guess I would like your thoughts on your perspective, which is such Chicano queer centered, and then having these external artists from outside our community just also be impacted and be influenced by your work. I think it takes your art as well into that transcendent geographical limits. I don't know if I translated that correctly, but hopefully you got it.
Well, you know, Daniel and Leo, who are, I think they're just an amazing duo, collaborators, lovers, artists. They work in tapestry and, you know, sewing and remarkable work. And I was following them. And when I heard they were going to be, you know, in Long Beach at MOLAA, I was like, oh, I have to go and visit, you know, them. And they invited me, and I was thrilled to go. And much to my surprise, they were working on a big, huge tapestry that I immediately looked at and recognized my own work was in there. There were pieces by Patsy Valdez, Ruben Esparza, and there was references to David Hockney, and so there was all these, you know, kind of queer Latinx, Chicano, pieces in this, and it was a portrait of themselves, and including wearing the Maricon T-shirt. That, you know, I that was something that I did back in the 70s. Whether it was doing the Maricon T-shirt in the 70s, or whether it's participating with Daniel when they were here at MOLAA and they did the huge big, you know, rainbow flag. To me, there's this synergy where we are all connected on some level. And where I've traveled, and like I mentioned before, in my travels, you know, with working in global advocacy with HIV, in every location, I would engage with LGBTQ community, and I was astounded by the similarities, the things that I could relate to. Like, you know, if you're gay in one country, you're gay in another country, right? But also the differences, and I feel very connected in a way that we couldn't in the last century. You know, and I've said this over and over too, like a lot of young people, you have to remember back then we did not have cell phones, the internet, et cetera, et cetera. So we had to search and look for any information and, you know, about anything that was, you know, gay or lesbian or queer. Whereas today, it's much easier to have this global network of engagement. And I was honored by them, and I'm trying to figure out how I can go and visit them. They've invited me down to Argentina, and I would love to do that. But that was a great experience seeing them at MOLAA.
I think now that COVID is sort of under control, that may be more possible than we thought.
Yeah.
There's also one question in the Q&A section, which is by one of our featured artists here at MOLAA, Yolanda Gonzalez. Thank you for joining us. And she says, Joey, congratulations. I've always loved, admired, and enjoyed your works of art since I met you 30 or so years ago. The painting of Victor Durazo and George Robles had always been one of my favorites, a documentation of those times. Where is that painting now?
So that painting is currently hanging at the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego. They're going to be having, you know, the museum has gone through an expansion, and I was just there yesterday and got to have a preview tour. The space is wonderful. They have this big gallery with, you know, Latinx art. That's a wide range. It's intergenerational and it's multi-ethnic. It's all these different mediums. Very exciting, you know, space. And I was privileged to see it. But that's where it's hanging. And if everything goes well, it may join their permanent collection. But we will see.
That is really exciting news. Again, we also are a collecting museum, so we're always excited when collections grow, artists get represented, because that's the whole point. And I think we have another Q&A. Oh, there we go. Yolanda, just looking forward to seeing it again. Thank you.
Oh yeah, yeah, Yolanda, and if you want to go down to San Diego someday and check it out and go have lunch, like we can do it.
And suddenly there's a field trip to San Diego. Why not? All right. So
She says, vamos.
oh, there we go. And I think so. Rafael Barrientos, I believe, yes. He has a comment in the chat that goes, thinking about how your very recent work picks up on your past visual styles so seamlessly. Joey, can you speak to your experience transitioning into becoming a full-time artist today and how you see your work develop to reflect your current worldview and perspective?
Okay, sure. So for those that don't know, like I mentioned, I worked for 17 years at AIDS Healthcare Foundation. And in 2021, I retired. I was planning to retire, but I had to move up my retirement a couple of months because I just got so busy with my art and artwork. So I am now, for the first time in my life, a full-time artist. Okay. I am not someone that is, cynical. I'm not like, I'm still very excited about this. I feel like I'm on a whole nother level and I'm engaging with the art world in a way that I had never had before. I would also just say that for the same reasons that my work was marginalized or not considered of value, or a line that I used to get frequently by curators coming in to look at my work in my studio is, we can't figure out how this fits into our curatorial strategies, right? Like, okay, it's for those same reasons that in this century, it now is becoming something that people are looking at, engaging with, collecting, and it's opened up a whole new world for me. So, or like I have these corny ways of putting things, but as I put it, it's a whole new movie, and I'm this artist with gray hair, and I'm loving it. The other thing is that I now have time to work on a lot of projects and paintings and some of these series that used to have to be put in a queue because I was so busy with my advocacy work related to HIV and AIDS. So I don't know if that answered his style or not, but I see some of my series are going to continue to be ongoing. Mi Casta es su Casta. There's always going to be people that I would want to paint. Still life with HIV meds. I've done small ones. I've done large ones. It's a continuation until I no longer have to take the meds, or until there's a cure. Okay. And then just engaging with people. I'm always learning, new people, meeting new people. And to me, that just means new options, potentials for making new work. Not sure if that answers his question or not, but yeah.
But I think that ties really well into what you were saying at the beginning of your interview, where you were calling yourself a storyteller. And each one of those new meetings, each one of those new individuals that you meet, it's a new story. It's a new line that goes out in that plot. So, and I do want to invite all the people that are with us today. We do have Joey's artwork here as part of the Guadalupe exhibition, and that's open until March 12th. Sundays are free at MOLAA, so you don't have to pay, just have to show up and partake. Allison, do you have anything else?
I think that's wrapping up. I want to say thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I know Sol and I both really enjoy all your works, especially this attention to empathy and humor, which is such a wonderful way to connect these stories, to bring out everyone's space to be able to talk. So thank you so much for joining us. And please, everyone, please join us for Guadalupe while it's still here, as Solimar mentioned. And we look forward to our next chapter of Zoom Project, I think.
Great. Right. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And